Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a special guest, J Warner Wallace. He has a new book out. It's called The Truth and True Crime: What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. I'm happy to have him on the show again. He's been on once before. J Warner Wallace is a Dateline featured cold case homicide detective, popular national speaker, and best-selling author. Welcome, Jim Wallace.
Hey, you know what? Thanks for having me. I feel bad because you look how put together and I got my stupid, like, free Alaskan scruggly face here, but thanks for allowing me on the show
I
looking this
can't
bad.
tell. Okay, I see.
Yeah, you can barely tell, but I usually try to grow facial hair because there's two, as you know, Beckett, I get to go up to serve with Billy Graham Association in Alaska, couples, uh, police couples where they've been involved in a critical shooting, and usually they're injured, their lives are changing, they've suffered some trauma, they've seen something, and now their marriages are tanking, and so they're like looking for help, and so they send them to us in Alaska, and we get to spend a week with them. A lot of them get saved up there and get
Wow.
baptized, and their lives are changed forever. But there's two guides that are in their 20s and 30s, and every time I go up, we do this thing where we try to grow out like a goatee, and then the last day we shave it down. We take pictures with goatees, then we shave it down to a Fu Manchu, then we shave it down to some other stupid thing. Like, we just try to, like, make goofy things and take pictures. So I so I have to,
I like that tradition. I can't
yeah.
grow facial hair because I
Well,
still
I
have
can't
like,
either. I can't do this stuff. That's why I
yeah,
don't even try.
it
It's gotta
doesn't
be
work
nothing
on me.
more than this. Yeah, I'm limited, so
Okay, so you have a new book. I don't
yeah.
know how you keep churning out these books, but it's called The Truth and True Crime:
Yep.
What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. Uh, what's the overall? Well, let's just get into specifics. So, why do you think people are so fascinated with true crime?
Well, I probably lots of reasons. Probably they love to solve mysteries, but I think the reason why I
By the
was
way, I've been
interested.
watching Lewis. I don't know if you've seen that British
No,
show. It's
I
a
have
true
I've heard a lot
crime
about it. So what do you think of it?
detective show, and it's really good.
Oh, really? Okay, then
But yeah.
I
Anyway, go
gotta
ahead.
watch it. We're giving shameless plugs now for shows that aren't even anything to do with us, but that's good. I need to watch it too. Yeah, I think that it's for me, I think it's a cautionary tale thing for a lot of people. Like, we watch it and we're like blown away by how people do certain things. Like, wow, can you believe somebody would do that? I think you kind of think that at least once in a while when you watch one of these true crime shows. And most of the fans for true crime are women. It's been known for years that it's dominantly female audience that
Why do you
watches
think that
them.
is?
Well, I've been reading, I was reading somebody who was a columnist, and she was saying that she thinks it's because these are cautionary tales. If most of the victims are women and most of the suspects are men, it does seem like if you're watching Dateline, it kind of feels that way. I can tell you in my own cases, yeah, men are almost always the people who are doing stupid things. Okay. And women often do that too, but then they usually end up employing a boyfriend or somebody to do the stupid thing with them or for them. So it's like, yeah, I can see why if you felt like you might watch a show, this is what she was saying, to see, like, what can I do so to make sure that doesn't happen to me. And that's why I wrote this book, because most of the time if you and I talk on the phone, it's probably not going to be about the stuff that I've written about in Cold Case Christianity or God's Crime Scene or even Person of Interest. It's probably going to be like, hey, I got this weirdo that is in my life right now. I'm not quite sure what to make of him, and let me run it by you. And what do you think? It's 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 this stuff. It's the stuff that is human behavior stuff that I've always wanted to write about, and I've been trying to convince a publisher. And you know how this is. Once you write with a publisher, they kind of see you in a certain way. And
Yeah.
because I happened to write Cold Case first, because Sean McDowell was the one who, kind of encouraged me to do it, I got seen that way after that, and I couldn't even convince a publisher to let me write this book until finally now I'm 9 books in. So this is the kind of book, though, that, to be honest, I could write a bunch of these because there's so much stuff that I have made a list, I think, of like 40 attributes, that 40 things that I've seen people do in criminal cases repeatedly that I think are like great life lessons. And when I pitched the book, maybe that's why no one would do it. I called it Death Lessons, and I think the publishers are like, terrible name. Don't think anyone's going to buy that book. So I get it. And then I called it for a while Chasing Leads, and then I called it for a while 15 to Life. And then finally, it ended up being called The Truth and True Crime. You know why? Because artificial intelligence picked that name, and we surveyed all the my choices along with a couple from AI. And Christians around the country said, Jim, your choices are really bad. But we like those AI choices, not even knowing whose were whose. So we
That's
ended up
funny.
coming to a title that way. Is that crazy? And
Yeah.
so anyway, that's why we call it this. But I'm just glad I finally got it written, because I think it really is, if I'm honest, like no one starts a conversation. How many people start a conversation about Jesus the way that I first got interested in Jesus? I don't know many people who are like, oh, I wonder if these gospels are really eyewitness accounts. And who does that? I mean, I was geeked out on that kind of stuff, but most of the time it's like, if there's a God, why would he allow this to happen to me? It's usually that kind of thinking
Yeah.
that starts a journey. And that's what this book is full of.
Yeah. Uh, so what you discovered something important about the connection between modern behavioral research and the biblical record. How do
Mhm.
studies about the human nature, this is all about human nature, this book.
Yeah.
How do studies about human nature confirm the truth of the Bible? So
So
this book is not a Rousseauian book, by the way.
yeah, you know, and a lot of these chapters I experienced before I became a Christian. You know, so this is going back not just to cold cases. This is going back to all kinds of other cases, just times where true crime stories, like some of them are robberies, where I had a contact with somebody. I was like, wow, that's a very interesting, and I'd see it over and over and over again. So it's the kind of thing. If you've ever known anyone who was raised by a cop, they're probably getting advice from their cop parent that is like, hey, like they're probably getting more restrictive about what they can do and can't do, because the cop parent is seeing the worst in everybody and worried that this is going to happen to our kids. You know, so my advice to my kids was always based on something I was learning online, or I mean on the job. I wish there wasn't online back in those days. So a lot of this stuff is stuff I was learning before I really had a way to confirm it with sociological research. So only now I'm able to say, yeah. So if I learned this back in the early '90s, working gangs, I'd learn certain things, and then it took a while for me. And I would, of course, tell my kids, don't do that, whatever it may be. But now I can look back and say, you know what? There's good research on this. And so for every chapter of this book, I've researched it now, and I've included the research in the book, so you can see that, yeah, it turns out these things you see working as a detective, you will be able to confirm them with sociological research, because it's out there, and it will show you these 15 attributes of human flourishing have been researched. But you also I didn't know till later, these are very ancient principles. In other words, these are all on the pages of scripture. If you just
Yeah.
read your Bible, you wouldn't need the sociological research, because you would actually have known this. And so the question I always had was, well, okay, so is the Bible just filled with advice that's good for people in the first century living in that region? Because it kind of, a lot of people that we know would say that this is a sheep herder book that is meant for people who are very primitive, who lived in the first century in this corner of the Roman Empire. Please don't try to apply it to modern life. That's stupid. But it turns out that these studies confirm that these are not really aspects of human flourishing that are dependent on history or even ethnicity, or even it turns out that these aspects of human flourishing are probably grounded in our biochemistry. In
Hmm.
other words, they're in the design from the creator, rather than, no matter where you are and where you are in history, when it occurred or where you lived on the planet, these 15 attributes always contribute to flourishing if you'll simply adopt them. And so that's why I tried to parallel each chapter. So you'll see that in the chapter, here's what the true crime story says, here's what studies say, here's what the Bible says, and guess what? They kind of line up. So I tell people sometimes that, look, if you don't even believe Christianity is true, you'd be smart just to live as though it is, because it turns out it will lead to flourishing in a way that you probably didn't anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, this book is essentially a book on wisdom, like
Yeah.
how to live the good life, or how to live a flourishing life, basically.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you this, and you tell me, because I know that I'm a lot older than you, but I've noticed that we are in a generation surrounded, and you're far more connected to what's happening in the culture probably than I am. I think what happens to cops is we kind of know what's happening in the culture from that side of working cases and having to see where people mess up. And we do that until we retire. And then a lot of us are like, I'm done with dealing with the culture and I'm going to retire to some, tiny town in Montana where there's no people
Yeah.
and I don't want to see another person for the rest of my life. I mean, I know about people who have done that. And so I'm not staying connected. I know you are. I kind of wonder sometimes if we can even offer wisdom. In other words, if I said to you that this victim in this case would still be alive today if they just hadn't done this, whatever this is. What I hear from young people is, are you victim blaming?
Yeah.
And
Well,
no, no, I'm not victim blaming. I'm not at all. But if we're saying that, hey, you ought not do these risky things because they lead to bad results, then you have to kind of erase the entire book of Proverbs, because Proverbs is filled with with basic, don't hang out with fools unless you want to end up like a fool. Well, are you telling me that if I end up like a fool, it's my fault? Well, sometimes. That's not victim blaming though, because I'm not going to work that case any less passionately than I would any other case. But don't tell me that as a cop, if you're working a case like that, you're not going home and telling your kids, hey, 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 don't do that, because it usually ends up leading someplace bad. Of course you are. So,
yeah.
so I think that that's what this. So there is some of that in this book, not a lot, but there is some of that in this book. I think there are cautionary things you can do, but if nothing else, these tales will expose the true nature of humans, who we are. That's kind of, I always say it this way: like if you weren't sure what was in my mug, well, the surest way to find out is just to bump it, and then whatever spills out, now you know what's in the mug. Well, these are cases where the person involved is had their mug bumped and nudged,
Yeah.
and so now the true nature of who they are spills out. And you know this because how many times have everything's going good, you're having a great day, and then something is inserted in your day that causes stress levels to rise. And suddenly a different aspect of your character emerges, right? Because it turns out our mug was nudged. And
Yeah.
and this is just the nature of who we are. And I think if you get to see that work in criminal cases, you can then report on what you're seeing. And that's what I'm trying to do in this book.
Yeah. I mean, well, just in answer to your question about the culture, current culture is, I mean, obviously we're in a postmodern world, and I think wisdom to young people is seen as patriarchy. It's seen as,
Yeah.
some relic of the past. And so wisdom is not appealing to young people anymore. They just want to go with whatever they feel. Like you just go with your feelings. So
Yeah.
uh
Gosh. So that raises a question then. So how do we reach a culture where there for years there have been people who made a living giving practical advice in business, life advice, and we get into a place where we're not even open to alternatives that might cause us to flourish. I don't know. That's a good question. I think most of us, practically speaking, though, we would like to do. If I guess I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and they were saying that what really happens is that young people are not typically interested in this until they fail.
hmm,
Something doesn't turn out the way they thought it would. And so then we're more reacting. And that's probably true for all of us as humans. Is like, yeah, if you're going along fine and everything's fine, what's the point in changing anything? It's when something hits you. I remember Tim Keller used to always say that Christianity offers better resources for suffering than any other worldview. And it is, I think, an evidence of its truth value. That yeah, if Christianity is true, then its foundational documents should describe us the way we really are, and it does. But I wonder, is a lot of this because we have to wait until we fail, we run into something, we hit a bump in the road, and then suddenly we're open to advice. We're open to, maybe that's true for
yeah.
all of us. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Jordan Peterson seems to be doing well in this arena where
Mhm.
people are really wanting wisdom, wanting, especially young men, I think that are his main audience. But
Yes.
and so maybe hopefully this book will be
Well, and one of the things that I struggle with on that is that so there's a chapter in this book on celebrity. And I wrote it because there was a guy who he was so much a local legend. He was a gangster years ago in South Central Los Angeles, and he was so well known for his connections to his family, for the fact that you could never catch him doing anything. He was always getting away with stuff, and he had tattoos like I'd never seen before. And he was so well known that he was almost a celebrity to the deputies who worked gangs in that region too.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay. And eventually his celebrity is what killed him. But I look at that, I say, man, you and I, we have to think about this too, because there's no gatekeeper for celebrity anymore. Any one of us can start a web platform and grow a huge followership, have a huge audience. And this issue of celebrity is important. So the antidote for celebrity, and it's just the opposite of well, help you don't flourish when you chase celebrity. I talk about this in the book. I offer what the
Yeah.
studies say about chasing celebrity. We've certainly seen it with Anthony Bourdain and others who have, kind of exposed what celebrity doesn't really satisfy the way you think it will. Matthew Perry, people like this. But
Yeah.
but so here's what I would say. I'd say, look, if you're gonna, it turns out the one thing that is the antidote for celebrity that actually contributes to the highest levels of human flourishing on every other metric, according to studies in the last 40 years, 35 to 40 years, if you were to read those studies, you'll see, and most secular people I talk to, they think maybe it's meditation or it's no, it turns out it's humility. Humility is the one thing that changes the game faster and harder than anything else. It's the cure to celebrity, but it's also what drives you to become a better learner, have deeper relationships, make more money, live longer, have better mental health. Every way we measure flourishing, celebrity improves it. So now the challenge for us, for Jordan Peterson, for all of us, is that if I wanted you to embrace the one thing I could tell you that would change your life faster than anything else, I cannot live in the opposite way. I have to watch in humility how much I am willing to let this become a celebrity thing. And so
Yeah.
I think what we would say is, hey, trusted authority is important for those of us who write books. You and I both write books. So trusted authority is important. But that fine line between trusted authority and celebrity is really easy to step over. And sometimes for some people, they are a trusted authority because they're a celeb. How many celebrity endorsements do we see in a political season? Like what qualifies these folks to even endorse anybody? They're a celebrity.
Right.
So we want trusted authority, and there's no danger in trusted authority, but there's danger in celebrity when we start thinking too highly of ourselves. And I just realized I got into a stage of life, I think when I turned 60, I suddenly thought, okay, what's my motive here? Like, am I been fooling myself with this? And I think it's about the same time that not probably a year or so after Ravi Zacharias fell. It was during that time, was up before the pandemic or during the pandemic when The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill was the most popular podcast in America for a while there. And I just remember thinking to myself, you know what? I need to pull it all down and figure out a way to do this without amplifying anything about me.
Hmm.
Hard to do, right? But one of the things I became more and more uncomfortable with was when you and we've spoken together at conferences several times. And what we do is you and I, we take a stage and people are looking up at us as though we're something. And then we go to our book table and we sign books as though our signature is worth something. And I'm so now uncomfortable with it that I have to figure out, okay, so my wife will always say, look, you don't step aside for this and then not serve the kingdom in any way because you're now paranoid about celebrity. That's not how you got to find a balance in this. You got to say, look, is this cause something that you should be involved in because you feel like you could really contribute something that would grow the kingdom or share the gospel? I'm really much more gospel centered than I've ever been in the past because I feel like I'm getting older and I got to get the attention off of whoever this thing is. I got to get it back to, and I say all of this, okay? Becket, I say all of this, and behind you is just a beautiful apartment. What's behind me? A glory wall full of all of this ridiculous celebrity stuff. So, so I can say all of it. And I always tell people, I don't do any of these 15 things well. I just don't. I think I'm broken on all of those 15 things, but I do know I'm supposed to aim at those things. And if I can just aim a little better, if you don't aim at anything, you hit it every time. So I just have to be careful. But I think this is the thing that's really challenged me is that humility piece, that celebrity piece. Like, is there a way somehow to do this? But I've changed everything. I mean, and here's what I started to do. The only way to reach me for a speaking engagement now is through our website. And that email does not go to a booking agency. it has to go directly. We have to say no to it. We say no to a lot of stuff. And we do that because I feel like I cannot do the things that just, if you wanted someone there because you think they're in some way a celebrity, that's probably not where I need to go. Now, what's great about what you're doing is that it's almost always so issue oriented that they couldn't bring me in to do your talk.
Mhm.
So this is it's easier, I think, when that's the case to say, this is an actual this is an issue-oriented conference. They're not just looking to put a name on the stage. They really want this topic
Right.
discussed. So that I think is a little bit different. So I just know that. Also, I think what happened too is a chapter in this book on identity. And so much of the time, Becket, let's think about it. Identity is huge. That chapter on identity was hard to write because it was so personal. But I realized that you and I are always struggling with this. Like, who are we? Who are
Yeah.
we now? And men are so bad about attaching our value and purpose, which are the Siamese, as they're synonyms basically for identity, because you get your identity from your purpose and value, or your purpose and value from your identity. So we always think, I mean, let's face it, if you woke up tomorrow and discovered that suddenly everyone unfollowed you and is no longer cares about anything you say on video, um, like me, I think we'd be shaken by that. We'd say, "Wow, who are we now?" So I've got to figure out, that's why I spent time on that chapter, is to say there's a better way to form your identity that will protect you, number one, from trauma, and number two, actually make sense of the process rather than figure out where you're good at something and form your identity from that. Why don't you figure out who you are and then form what you're good at from that? So it's just one of two ways of doing this, and I think the second way is far better. And that's you. I mean, you talked so much about identity yourself. I try to listen carefully when I get people who are talking about these things, and then I just steal your ideas and put them in my book. So that works out so good, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
hope we're all doing that at some point, though. That's what we do.
Yeah, the whole celebrity thing, culture is it, this, I don't know, the last year has been very bizarre and strange for me, because people will come up to me and say, "Oh, you're a celebrity." And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Do not say that." And I'm like, "Jesus is the celebrity. Do not look at me for anything." Like, just it really freaks me out when people do that.
Yeah,
And you're,
and
like
it
you said,
happens a lot.
yeah. And like the selfies and the line of people with the selfies, I'm like, I mean, I want to be polite and I want to be, nice to people, but it's
I
also
do
like,
it.
I don't want the
Yes.
focus on me. I want it on Jesus.
Yeah,
Please
and even
stop.
if you said this from the stage, let's say I'm doing the talk on humility that comes from this book. I might say this from the stage. You're still going to get requests when you get off the stage, and you're still going to honor them. I'm not going to
Yeah.
get weird about it, but
Yeah.
I just want people to know that you have to make a conscious effort in every one of these categories. If I said, "Hey," to my own kids, "Here's 15 ways that you will be an unbelievable. If you just do these 15 things, you'll be a better employer, better employee. You'll have better marriage. You'll be a great parent." Like all the things that you care about now that you wonder, will I be good at those things? These 15 rules will actually make you better in all of that. Okay. Now, if I say that to them and then I don't embody it, if I don't, first of all, you're going to look at me and say, "Pop, really? Okay, did you do those 15 things when we were growing up?" Probably not. Okay. So, I get you. I get you. But now I'm looking back and I'm going, wow, I wish I could change some things. How many times do we say that? I mean, I've said it.
Yeah.
I think old age is just where you experience that, where you,
Exactly. I know. I'm going
and
through that now. I'm like, gosh, I wish I could change a lot of things from my past.
yeah, well, I think
Okay.
and that's a benefit though of us
Yeah.
writing books right now. So what I tried to do in this book is give you 15 things that I'm not good at, but if I could have been good at this, I would have had a better life. Now it's not too late for you.
That's good. That's good. Now, what's the most surprising thing you learned about human nature investigating murders and other crimes?
Well, I do think it was that humility piece was a surprise for me. But there's another thing that, because I don't think I would have, I don't think I would have, if that was a Jeopardy question, I'm not sure I would have got it. And I'm a Christian. And think about it, of all the worldviews that leverage and promote humility, there's none like Christianity, because
Wow.
every worldview in which so before you became a Christian, you like me, because I was 35. You were, I think, even older. How old were you when you became a
I was
Christian?
42 when I became.
Okay, so you were even older than me. So if you think about it, when you became a Christian, before you were a Christian, you expected that when you did certain things in your industry, a positive result would occur. In other words, I do these things, I get a positive result. I can do, and I expect to get this. If I go to school and take these classes, I expect to get a degree. If I do these things, I expect to get promoted, expect to get that job. Because it's a do and then it's reciprocal. It's a transactional life.
It's yeah.
This is true for all of secular worldviews. We live in a meritocracy where we actually expect to get what we've earned, and we work to earn those things. Now, this is also true of every spiritual and religious worldview, right? You do these things and you'll be pleased. You'll please Allah. You will you karma yoga, or it's the eightfold, whatever it may be. If it's Near Eastern or if it's any other religious worldview, it's about you doing something to earn the highest thing that that religious worldview offers, to be in the presence of God, to experience nirvana, whatever it may be. You do it by way of doing. Now, here's the problem. All doing worldviews, whether they're secular or theistic, lead to pride, because pride is really generated by doing. It's
Mhm.
the doing, and it's always looking across the hall and say, I'm doing more than that guy.
Yeah.
I got passed over for a promotion. He didn't deserve to get that promotion. I did so much more. Doing. And it leads to pride. You remember Mike Adams? I mean, Mike Adams was a dear friend of mine. And when he passed, I mean, we were all heartbroken. And he used to tease when I was doing these Fearless Faith conferences with Frank Turek. He used to tease all the time that I've written a new book, How to Become Humble and 10 Easy Steps and How I Made It in 8. That's just typical Mike Adams, right? And I thought, yeah, it's just so true. If you pursue this and try to earn humility, you will simply become the opposite of humble. Any doing worldview leads naturally to, I'm proud of what I've done. And there's the problem. So there's a worldview out there that says, you know what? You're not even capable of doing any of this. You're such a mess. I'm going to have to do it for you. And I'm going to give it to you for free so that no one can boast. Well, that's a worldview that's steeped in humility. So
Mhm.
I think most of us, we ask our non-believing friends, hey, what's the one thing you could do that would cause the biggest change in your life for the better? They're not going to say humility, I bet.
Yeah.
They're going to say something, but it ain't going to be humility. And it turns out it is humility. And that could be just a coincidence, or it could be that the one worldview that leverages humility is the one worldview that comes from the mind of God, who has designed you for a certain purpose. And it turns out if you'll simply function the way he's designed you to function, you'll actually function better. And I think that's what we're seeing with this human. That was a surprise for me. The other thing that's a surprise for me, and I didn't think about it much, and I've always tried to figure, and this is why I'm glad I'm talking to you today. You and I have talked about, what do we do in the church when we've got people who hold a different sexual ethic than is supported by Christianity, and we're trying to figure out, like, what should our posture be before these people? Should we, like, how do we love them well enough to be able
Yeah.
to, like, how do you do that? Do you attend a gay wedding? We've talked about this how many times? You and I have talked about it.
Mhm.
And okay, so here's the interesting thing. And there's a chapter in this book on this dual nature. It's actually called A Tale of Two Brothers. And it's a story about a mom who called me after her second son was arrested for murder. Her first son had died years earlier in a shooting at a party. And she had raised both of them at opposite extremes. One where because there was no father in the home, and so she raised the first one under justice. You will do this, rules, rules, rules. And he rebelled. And so the second one, she was just, I'm going to love you to death. And so she couldn't hold these two things in balance, the two natures of God. God is described in the Old Testament as the fullness of justice and grace, justice and truth, justice and mercy, or the fullness of truth and grace. Justice, truth, grace, mercy, the fullness of both of these opposite inclinations we have. And she was either in the justice and truth side with one son, or the grace and mercy with the other. And because she's got them out of balance, neither one turns out well. We have to hold them in fullness to do well. And we don't do that as humans. The only being on planet Earth that does that is God. The
Mhm.
only being in the universe that does that is God. Holds them. This is why when John says that Jesus came in the fullness of truth and grace in John chapter 1, it's yet another proclamation of his deity. because only one being has truth and grace in fullness. It's God. So what's
Yeah.
interesting about that for me is that I had last year, this year, I did an event in a city in Texas where it was a Christian school. So I'm there all day talking to the students, and then in the afternoon, I had a session with their teachers. And I asked them, I said, "Hey, can we want to love like God loves? I get it. Let's give me some synonyms for love." And so I just let the minds kind of generate synonyms for love, and I got everything you can think of. But acceptance was one of those. Embracing people, accepting them as they are, blah blah blah. All of this is on the wall. It's good stuff. Caring, adoration, all the things you would think of with are synonyms for love. So I got this whole list. And then I drew on the whiteboard. Okay, so let me just give you some geometry, some mathematics of God's nature. We know in the New Testament, God is love. He's described this, not that he can create love, he's experienced love, he's a lover. No, God is love. They're like equal sign. God equals love, I wrote. We also see, though, in the New and Old Testament that God is the fullness of truth and grace, justice and mercy, law and love. You see this balance. And
Yeah.
so you could say God equals that. Well, if God equals this and God equals that, you can take the God out of the middle. Now you know what it is to love like God loves. Love equals the fullness of truth and grace, the fullness of justice and mercy. That's what it is to love like God loves. And I said, look at your whiteboard here. There's not a single synonym here that represents truth or justice.
Mhm.
Every synonym here is a synonym for, and grace was on there. Mercy was on there. It was all the mercy side. So we think, I think, as a culture,
Yeah.
that in order to love like God loves, it's just this half of who God is. It's the grace and mercy side. And that means that we could go years loving somebody who is destined for destruction,
Mhm.
according to the scriptures, yet find it hard to ever say anything true and just. Like if you were just going to love like God loves, you could say this. Make a list in your mind. How many times have I done an act of mercy or grace? And how many times have I ever spoken the truth?
Mhm.
I think you're going to find that you're probably way out of balance. Now, I know it's hard because most of the time we don't have a relationship with somebody that allows us to do the truth justice side. I get it.
Yeah.
But I think we've just, as even these teachers who are teaching, they're Christians teaching high school Christians, like everyone goes, oh, I never thought of it that way. So I think we've
Yeah.
all thought, hey, I'm just going to love and love and love and love. And then something is going to happen extraordinary without my ever having to speak the truth about anything. But it turns out, and that could happen. I mean, God's capable of doing anything he wants to do. But at some point, I bet you were loved enough to engage the ideas, and then truth was spoken, and some combination of those two things was transformational in your own story, probably in all of our stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
so
mean,
that's
it's like
where I think it's
I
helpful.
always say Jesus, and you said it, Jesus was the perfect balance of grace and truth, love and 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 truth. And um it's hard as it's hard as humans, it's hard as Christians to keep that balance.
Mhm.
It's very difficult. It's always kind of like we're always moving to one side or the other. There's always
Yes.
the really harsh person, or someone who's like, oh, I accept everything and everything, love is love. So it's hard to keep that balance.
Yeah, it really
So
is. And I think that's one of the things that I don't think that's another thing I don't do well. And I think that, but I need that to share with my own kids that are you seeking that balance? When I wrote this book the first time and I had that chapter in there, Amy Hall, who is my editor on almost every book, because she's just unbelievable. You know her, she's just
I love her. Yeah.
unbelievable. Yeah. She said, it's not that the idea of using the word balance is a problem. So I had to kind of clarify it in this chapter because she says that means that you're sometimes taking something out to get it balanced. And you don't want to make it sound like you need to speak less truth to get it in balance or show less mercy. But I said, you're right. So the important thing when I say balance, it's the fullness. If it's in fullness, it's in
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
So it's not about taking stuff out. It's about putting stuff in that you haven't been putting in before. So it's not about being less gracious or less truthful in order to strike balance. It's about like, am I all in on both? Am I? I think the idea that I would sacrifice for somebody who I don't agree with on this particular issue, whatever it may be, but at the same time, I'm going to speak the truth to them. So there's a chapter in this book also, Becket, about friendships.
Hmm.
And you know this, you have a handful of good friends. And the friends that cause us to flourish are like that. Like, it's not like, we know how many people in the apologetics community, but you could just, and they even know you well enough to have your phone number probably in their phone. But those aren't necessarily the kinds of friends that'll help you flourish. And the research shows this. You have to have a small number of deep divers. You have to have a
Yeah.
small number of people who know you so well that you've given them permission to jerk your chain. You've given them permission to say, Becket, you're being an idiot right now. And because you love them as your friends, you're not going to walk away. Because you could say, really, I'm not. No, you're not going to walk away because you actually have given them permission to do that because you love them that much. And they know that they can't lose you as a friend by speaking the truth to you. So they do. So
Yeah.
it turns out we have to have those kinds of friends. And when you really love someone like that, then you can do this fullness of grace and truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely need my group of friends to speak truth into my life for sure. It's
Yeah.
it's it's very helpful and it's necessary.
Mhm.
Now, you talk about in the book, many crime stories are centered around poor relationships.
Yeah.
What did you learn about the nature and quality of friendships during, I mean, we talked about this a little bit just now, but
No, but yeah, I think it's fascinating to me that, most people give you an example of this. There's a good chance if someone kills you, Beckett, it's somebody you know.
yeah.
It might even be somebody you call a good friend right now.
What's the percentage of that?
Man, I wish I knew. I can tell you this anecdotally, one thing I learned a long time ago, and I talk about this in the chapter of the book. That's something I call the proximity principle. So here's how this starts off. We go into a crime scene and we see you got a dead body. Okay, look, whoever killed that person was in their presence probably when they did it. So this person who got killed allowed or didn't allow, but at some way, this suspect got within their physical proximity before they killed him. So, okay, the question is like, who is in this person's proximity? And so I look at two things. If you're at a dartboard and the bullseye is where your victim is, okay, well, the inner circles of that dartboard are going to be the people who she's closest or he's closest to relationally. So the first thing I'm looking for is relational proximity because, like you said, yeah, a huge high percentage of these are relational.
Hmm.
So, like, okay, does this person have a boyfriend? Okay, where's the boyfriend right now? Husband, wife? Where is that person right now? Oh, no husband or wife or boyfriend? Okay, close friends? Who are they? You're just moving outward in the
Yeah.
concentric circles. Okay, how about okay, no, how about like people they worked with, larger associates? I mean, you're just going outside the ring and keep on going. But you start with the people with whom that person is closest. That's just the nature of it. Now,
Yeah.
if that runs out and you don't have anybody, now you're looking for what I just your different kind of proximity. Now you're going to geographic proximity. Really? Does he have a roommate? Who's living with this guy? Who are his neighbors? Like you're looking for geographic proximity. Now, the toughest cases are the cases where there's no relational or geographic proximity. Now, I got one of these cases, and it's a case that I started tinkering with way back before I was even a Christian. And I was assigned to this special investigations division. And I had a case that my dad had worked on when he was a young guy, 1972. So this victim was about 10 or 11. I was about 10 or 11. And it shook us as a family, as a community, it shook us.
Hmm.
This kid was snatched. And so the question is, well, proximity principle. And of course, the initial detectives spent a lot of time and you just start to see things that maybe aren't even there. Like you're thinking, okay, this uncle said something fishy. It is the uncle, the proximity
Yeah.
principle. You're focused on these people. Anyway, long story short, there was no relational or geographic proximity. So sometimes we'll say this, we'll say, hey, if you open a case 30 years from now, there's a good chance that the murderer you identify in 30 years is somebody who was interviewed back in the day. In other words, we always say the name will be in the book. It's in that first set of books where people are like making all these, they make reports of everyone they've talked to. And although nothing was ever proven, 30 years from now, oh, sure enough, the name was in the book all along. Just couldn't prove it. Just didn't have a way to connect the dots. So I expected when this finally got solved, because I started probably working it in 95-ish, 90, probably, yeah, right around there. And I expected it didn't get solved till 2019. And when I got the call that they identified who it was, because I thought, well, the first thing I wanted to know is the name in the book, because that would have meant that all the original detectives missed it and that I missed it, because I really started to deep dive this probably about 5 or 6 years later, when I asked to have it assigned to me as a case. And then I was working the case and really deep diving it, because I was just tinkering with it originally. And I thought, well, this is probably somebody who I read that name, I would have missed it too. So it turns out, though, somebody was a complete stranger who didn't live in our city. He was just driving through our city on the way up the coast and snatched this girl off the street. Now, that kind of case, it's not going to it was solved with ancestry DNA.
Oh, okay.
That
Yeah.
kind of case is not going to get solved because there's no proximity.
Yeah.
That's very rare. You more than likely, you believe it or not, you're going to get killed by somebody you know. And I'll tell you, there's a way to avoid that. There's a story in this book in which someone is killed by somebody she called her best friend. So clearly, some friends are going to be better for you than others. So here's what the data shows. Here's what the surveys show. The friends that cause human flourishing are three steps. Number one, small number. So you're not, you could say I have 100 friends that are all at the same level. Well, that's not going to help you flourish.
Yeah.
You need a small handful of friends. Why? Because the second attribute, deep divers, they have to be friends that will go deep with you and tell you where you're wrong, that care about your physical well-being, your mental well-being, your spiritual well-being, and they'll do what they need to do to make sure you flourish in those 3 areas. In other words, they actually think more about you at times than they do about themselves. Those are rare friends.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, have I even been that kind of a friend to anybody else? Like, why would I expect anyone to be that kind of friend to me when I haven't been that friend to anybody else? But the point is, if you have a small number of deep diving friends. Now, in this story, this woman was killed by somebody who fit those first two criteria, yet she still killed her, because the third thing has to be present, and that's virtue. You have to have a small number of deeply connected, virtuous friends. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because who decides what's virtuous? Now, every group I've ever worked that was involved in criminal activity, if it's just a bunch of guys who are doing burglaries and they hang out together, they've got their own code of ethics. If you're working gangs, there's certainly a code of virtue amongst gangsters. And it's probably not the code you're thinking of. It's probably a code that's
Yeah.
very unique to that setting. And if you do this to us, you should expect us to do that to you. Don't complain about it. We won't complain about it either. It's just tit for tat. It's what we do. Well, that's not what makes something virtuous. So it turns out that if you want to have a small number of deep diving virtuous friends, you're going to figure out how you're going to ground virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you're probably looking at a theistic worldview that says that virtue is simply a reflection of God's holy nature. Otherwise, you're going to debate about, because this group that killed this woman, they had their own code and they had their own set of priorities. Things they would say were good, made for a good day, and things that made for a bad day. But because they weren't grounded objectively, it led to her demise. So that's why I would say that for young people, why do you think young parents of Christian kids want their Christian kids to take this seriously and then surround themselves with other kids who take this seriously? Because it turns out this issue of objective virtue can only be addressed if you think that there's a source, an
Right.
all-knowing source that even when you aren't acting virtuously is watching and has provided you the tools by which to act virtuously. So that's just something that you see when you work these. And there's a couple of these things too, where it's like, yeah, if you don't have an objective source for some of this grounding, it's going to be hard to do this well.
And yeah, and some of us motivated more than others to commit a crime, but you discovered three important motives for misbehavior. What are they and why do they matter?
Okay, so we've talked about these, and they apply to us. So if you had an Olympic Games of of stupid reasons to do stupid things. We're going to have an Olympics of stupid. There's a gold medal and a silver medal and a bronze medal you could give to people who are motivated to do stupid things. Now, when they stand on that pedestal at the end of the day to get their rewards, that pedestal is called pride. So these
Mhm.
are all ways that pride manifests itself. Our self-absorption manifests itself. And it's always the same three things. And so it's always, and I think the silver and the bronze are probably debatable which one goes where. It's going to be sex and money, sexual lust, relationships, and money, stuff, material wealth, just cash, that kind of thing. But the third one, the gold medalist that stands on the top of the podium, is just the pursuit of power. And when I say the pursuit of power, it is, autonomy, control, at the expense of others often.
Mhm.
This motivates a lot of bad behavior. And so people will write to me and say, well, isn't there a fourth? What about jealousy? Well, what's causing you to be jealous? It's one of those three things. What about
Yeah.
vengeance? What's causing you to be vengeful? It's one of those three things. And where do certain things fit? And you get a mass shooting of somebody who comes in and shoots 30 people of a different color. That's power. My color is more important than yours. I think I'm better than you. When I steal from my parent to support my habit, I think my habit is more important than my comfort's more important than your comfort. My
Mhm.
desires are more important than your desires. That's a control, power, respect. But there's a dangerous hidden thing in that category of power. And that's where the celebrity thing is. It's hiding in the pursuit of power. Now, why
Mhm.
is it important? Well, if you're pastoring a church and you're wondering, how is it I could be made a national fool and lose everything? I'll tell you right now, it's going to be in sex, money, and power. That's it. If you can protect yourself in those three areas, and nobody does, nobody will. And here's why. Your elder board, and you will probably, the pastor would probably say, yeah, I need to be protected in the money. I got to make sure I've got a limit on what my income is going to be. And that's very public. And we talk about publicly what I'm making, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And I'm going to protect myself on the sex thing. I'm going to make sure I have accountability, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know any elder board in any church that wants you to be less famous as the
Mhm.
pastor. They want you to have a podcast and a book deal and speaking engagements and anything that'll draw attention to the church and grow the church. And if this is a celebrity church, then that's actually going to work for them. And there's the problem. The problem is that we tend to disregard the dangers of the power side. Now we certainly highlight it when we find a pastor who's been abusive to his staff, right? Or he's been domineering. But I'm just talking about, how about just famous, sweet guy, but just scratch the itch called fame. So I know this is controversial to say, but you cannot scratch one of these without scratching the other two. So if you thought, well, I'm just going to protect myself over here, but I'm going to become famous. Well, fame usually brings with it certain financial benefits and also temptations from
Mhm.
people who want to sleep with famous people or want to have a relationship with famous people.
Yeah.
And you may not have ever been tempted in those two areas before until you scratch the fame itch. And that's why we have to be careful not to scratch it. And we can't take our own celebrity seriously at all. And you just need to do it and get back in hiding. In
Yeah.
other words, you just need to do what it is God's called us to do, and
Yeah.
then try to get back to the quiet life that God is calling us to live.
Yeah.
And here's the problem. The problem is you and I both know it. Even if you're writing books, I don't know about you, but most publishers, the first thing they want to know is, how famous are you?
Yeah, exactly.
And so now they like everybody else, they said, no, we're not trying to use it in a corrupt way. We just want to advance the gospel. That's always for some good cause, right? Some good purpose. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what you say it is for. If we are now more concerned about our fame for whatever good purpose you might think it might serve, we're putting ourselves at risk. So,
Mhm.
so I've been thinking about this really, since the whole thing with Robbie, and I think you and I were either serving on cross-examine instructors. We were together for something. Maybe it was for reality, wherever it was when that was happening. We were talking about it, and I just realized, okay, I got to stop talking about it and decide: am I going to do something about this? Am I going to actually change the way I position some of this stuff? We stopped
Mhm.
creating thumbnails that involved our faces. We're just trying to figure out ways to reduce the thing that points to us rather than what it is we're saying. But here's the
Right.
problem. You know that look what we're doing here. Look what we're doing here. It's all face forward. It's that we're saying this. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is this the nature of the world we're living in right now? Maybe. But it's something we gotta struggle with for sure.
I know it is. It's a weird thing. I mean, I I long for the day when I can just completely remove myself from social media, from everything. I just long for that.
Oh, dude, I
Um,
can't tell you this week alone, there's been several times when I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could just um pull it all down and
I
you
know,
go, well,
but
why?
publishers, you have to have it up for
Well,
publishers.
and this is the thing too. I feel like right now we just got this book, right? So now I have this partnership, and not so much. I'm not worried about the contractual side of it. It's just that these are people who I love, who have been very good to me and provided me a chance to say things I wanted to say, and I want to hold up my end of that bargain, right? Which largely is about, well, can I get people that follow our work anyway to see if this is interesting to them? This is the tough part about it is that, yeah, this is all now content marketing and platform. And that's the first thing publishers ask. If you're wondering, well, how do I get a book published? Well, sadly, the first thing you have to do is start working on your platform because
Mhm.
that turns out that, and that, when that started when Amazon came online and it didn't help. So in other words, like marketers you're not going to write a book and a publisher is going to make you famous. No, it's that famous people write books.
Yeah.
Now that's sad. But not that you want to be famous anyway. But what I'm saying is that there's no mechanism that the publisher really has to get your idea on the shelves anywhere because there are no shelves anymore. It's all digital sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the brick and mortar bookstores, for the most part, except for the very, very small, the chain stores are gone. So the question then becomes, well, so now it's a strength of name recognition on an internet platform, which I think is there's no, I mean, I can't tell you the number of things that have been said about me online that there's blatantly false. And then you wonder, okay, so what am I? And by the way, anytime you try to engage them, it never seems to matter because
No.
whatever you say, they just take that and twist that and they're off to a new form of what's false. So I just don't know really. Is it because we're in this internet world right now? Is that what this probably? Because how could that even happen back when Lee Strobel wrote The Case for Christ? There was no this was not
Yeah.
the state of the world at the time, but it
Those were
is
the
now.
those were the good old days.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
I definitely miss those days.
Hmm.
Um,
I do
yeah,
too.
you talk about worship in the book.
Yeah.
You describe our universal desire to worship. Talk about that a little bit?
Okay, well, this is good. I know we're going to come up on a hard stop, but I want to just say this is a good place to talk about this because I never would have said this when I was working it, but it is true that it is misplaced worship. It's idolatry that's behind most crimes. That
Mhm.
we take those categories, the same categories that cause us to do stupid things, sex, money, and power. These have been given to us by God for our good and to glorify Him. Yet we just twist these in some way because we over amplify them. We make them something they're not supposed to be. Like we stop one, like if we're sitting here and our focus should be God, we stop one level short of God at the things that God has provided for us. And then we turn those into our gods. And of course, anything that becomes your God or becomes your idol is the thing that masters you. And
Mhm.
it sucks up all your time, all your attention, all your money, all your thought life. It just becomes the thing you obsess over. It becomes the thing that you order your life around, often the thing that you start to identify by. And it's this thing that is good, but this kind of worship is going to make it bad. You're going to turn it into something ugly.
Mhm.
And so this is what I saw happening in cases that I was working. Now I never thought at the time, yeah, it's all idolatry, but it is. And what happens is the smallest thing will cause you Like you can't scratch an idol, like scratching a car. Remember when you first buy a new car and then you have it, you didn't get the first dent, the first good scratch. So you can get over yourself, right? You can get over
Exactly.
the new car because you think this new car is like you can't park it in certain parking lots. You're
Uh,
parking at the far end of the parking lot. Then you come back and oh my gosh, there's a scratch on it. You're heartbroken. Then at some point you're like, yeah, should I even wash this thing this month? I'm not even sure if I will. Well, like you're over it, right? Because it moves from idol to tool, and that's the process by which we needed to do that, so we won't create this obsessive thing. So I got a couple of cases here, but one in the book where the guy got killed for next to nothing, but the nothing he got killed for had become an idol to the person who did the murder.
mm,
So if for example, if you're somebody who power is your thing, then the least little thing's going to offend you, and
yeah.
you're going to become a controller because you're trying to control your public perception. You're going to become angry at anyone who challenges you in any way because your idol is the power and control thing. If your idol is sex, then you're never going to be satisfied, and you're going to be constantly raising the bar and feeling like, and also you're going to find yourself becoming less attractive and obsessing over how sexually attractive you might be because you've made an idol of the thing that never should have been made an idol. If it's money, well, then you're going to become probably stingy.
Yeah.
Most people who obsess over money are become like stingy, ungenerous people who are, you know, you don't. So there's anytime you take one of these good things, and so I've got a case here where this guy was killed for probably about. I mean, the guy who killed him was probably losing maybe a couple dollars a day because of this guy, this victim, and
Wow.
they were both homeless people in our city who were living in on the streets and alleyways. The one was killed. The victim was killed. He was living in a porta potty. He was sleeping in it every night, and he got killed, offering nothing you would think in sex, money, or power, but the little because the guy who killed him had made an idol of power and respect, street cred,
Hmm.
and an idol of the $2 that he might have lost. He was willing to kill for that
Wow.
because those are the things that will control you. Now, this happens to all of us right now. It's not just we're all. I forget who. I think it was Calvin who said that we're all master craftsmen of idols. We are by our very nature idol factories,
Right.
and this is why you see. How many times do you read the Old Testament and you think to yourself, "My goodness, what a bunch of knuckleheads! We would never do that."
Yeah.
Like minutes after being like delivered from something or scolded about something by God, they're right back to it, to the idols of their neighbors. And it feels like, well, that's not us. I think we're far worse because
Yeah.
if you think about what was available to them in that generation to turn into an idol, far less diversity of what's available to us to turn into an idol. So I think we're actually in a worse position sometimes as idol makers than the generations were reported in the Old Testament. But in the end, that misplaced, and I know you and I have talked. I have an idol. I know what it is. And in this chapter, in every chapter, I try to give you like, okay, here's the true crime story. Here's the observation from research about this aspect of human flourishing. Here is a section called Chase the Lead, where here's how you can do it better. Here's some practical tools that you can employ so you won't make that same mistake. And then finally, here's where scripture has talked about it all along and what it really means. Okay, well, in this chapter, I try to give 12 questions that you can ask to identify your idol. The easy ones are things like, well, where are you spending your money?
Hmm.
Where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your talents? You got some energy, you got some giftedness. Where are you spending that? How are you exercising? That's probably something you've overly prioritized. But you can go a little deeper. And I think the ones that are the most interesting to me personally are like, what is the thing that can make you angry fastest? It's probably something that has to do with an idol you've created.
Yeah.
And right now in culture, you see this all the time. I think that our obsession with the national political polarization is an idol for a lot of people. And it's certainly an idol for a lot of commenters who are got podcasts because they're making a living doing this.
Yeah.
And it becomes the most important thing. And I just know this, I can't be that engaged in that anymore as an idol and still serve my family or my marriage well. I just can't.
Yeah.
um, Forget about God for a second. I just can't even serve the other things that could be idols in my life. And I know for me, the thing that is most important to me has always been my marriage. And that is, I have to struggle with that because I used to say before I was a Christian that I love marriage way more than I love Susie. And I do even now because that institution of marriage was not respected by my parents. Now I want a kind of marriage with Susie that means in order to love marriage more than I love Susie, I have to try to love her spectacularly if I can because I want that kind of marriage. Well, okay. Well, is I put that before I didn't know there was a God, but I knew that I had this marriage. And then we were together 18 years before we became Christians. So then it's been hard to put to keep God in his rightful place when
Mhm.
for years my God was this marriage. So it's always going to be some good thing that you would think, I'm glad you're happy. That's honorable. Yeah, but not when it becomes an idol.
Yeah, I
And
think
that's
Tim
what we
Keller
have
said
to.
it's always a good thing that becomes an ultimate thing.
Yes. And that's the problem. Yeah. So I think I love Keller's work. And so I've learned probably more from Tim Keller over the years than I care to admit. But yeah, that's something that is true what he said. And I think that this is why a book like this is really just trying to give you a set of things that are just observations that we all at some point make about life. And maybe we didn't realize that, yeah, there's actually research on this. There's secular research on our idol. Is it not called that way?
Yeah,
You know, it's about our interests, what it is that drives us.
right.
And as you might think that Christians do better than non-Christians in terms of holding things in proper balance. We don't statistically, according to the surveys. So even if we say we're God worshipers, there's our what concerns us and where we're spending our money, what drives us, it gives away what really matters to us, and it's almost always very similar to what matters to the culture.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Is the book available now?
Yeah, so it's you can go to thetruthandtruecrime.com. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to how can I always tell people, look, exhaust everything I'm offering you for free before you buy anything because I don't want you to think I'm trying to sell you this. So we've written thousands of pieces of content on our website over the last 15 years. Exhaust those, read them. But this kind of a book, I know if it's different. It's different than anything I've ever done. So what we tried to do is offer a bunch of free stuff to anyone who buys the book. So when you go to thetruthandtruecrime.com, you'll see this package we have for anyone who buys the book. And also you can read or listen to the first 3 chapters for free,
Mhm.
like right away. And that'll help you to see if this is worth your time. But in the end, my hope is that that this is something that I wrote really for my grandkids more than anything else. I wanted something that expressed these things I just needed to say because I've observed them, but I didn't know, if I was ever going to get the chance. So I hope that everyone who reads it comes away with something they can actually use to flourish.
Good. Well, we'll put the link down in the website of that website down below. Jim Wallace, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, Becket, I feel like we're partnered in this. So anything I can do to help you, and you've certainly been a blessing to me. So I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you next time.